internet person? My name is Mattie, and today I'm going to be talking about how I learned Korean at home, methods, method, the method, I don't know what to call it. Last week on Language Wednesday, I talked about how I learned Korean at home, but I really only talked about the resources and only very briefly mentioned how I utilized each resource. So today I'm going to be talking about 10 things, like 10 actual things that I did or implemented into my study that I personally feel really helped me progress in Korean a lot faster and just generally absorb more knowledge. But I want to make a quick disclaimer that maybe not all of these tips will work for everybody, but these tips can be applied to any language that you're learning. This is not Korean specific. Let's just get into it. So the first tip is to really look at how your language study is organized. I personally recommend when you're learning grammar for a language to find a book series or a curriculum to follow. I talked about that more in my resources video if you want to watch that. But when you do this, it's easier to get an overview of what you're going to be doing for the next several chapters. Therefore, you can plan it out in a planner, on My Study Life, or in a bullet journal. You can do the same thing with your memorize, your organic listening, maybe your speaking practices. I find that when I organize my tasks and give myself a checklist to check off every single week, not only am I more productive, but I'm less stressed about where my study is going because I have a really clear view of what I'm going to be doing, and then I can also look back and see how much I've done. And once you have your organization on track, you'll probably feel a little bit more productive as you can see how much you're actually getting done. This can not only be motivating, but it can also be convicting. If maybe you're not doing as much as you thought you were, then you can adjust the amount of time you're spending on studying every day. The second thing kind of follows this, and this is just simply consistency. When I mean consistency in language learning, I mean do something every single day. Even if it's only for 2 minutes, even if it's for 5 hours, it doesn't matter as long as the foreign language that you're studying is being incorporated into your daily life. When you do something in language every single day, not only are you furthering it every day, but you're making it become a part of your life. So like for me, it's gotten to the point where there's no question that I'm going to be doing something with Korean. Even if I'm not sitting down in front of a book that day, I'm going to be listening to a podcast or a song, I'm going to be watching a YouTube video or a V-Live. It doesn't matter as long as I do something every single day. Even if you're busy and like literally you have time to watch a 2-minute YouTube video, that's fine. Now it's important to vary the amount of time you're studying every day. Obviously 2 minutes every day isn't really going to get you that far. But to me, it's better to do really small chunks of studying time if you're really busy on a certain day than doing nothing at all. Number 3. This is what I like to call organic listening on top of passive listening. Now I did talk about organic listening in the resources video as well, but I'm going to go a little bit more into depth about how I actually approach this. Organic listening, by my definition, is just real, unscripted, raw Korean with no subtitles, like just very natural Korean. I think it's really important to have organic listening every single day, no matter the amount of time. Like I said before, it's all about consistency, not necessarily the amount of time, but the consistency overall of your study. While I really firmly believe in organic listening, I think that more passive listening is also helpful as well, like when you're watching a drama or a variety show or maybe a YouTube video that does have subtitles on it. I think when you're doing a combination of both, you're going to have the best results. Organic listening really makes your ears do lots of work, and this is what really strengthens your listening skills in a foreign language, and it can also be very useful when it comes to your pronunciation. The more of the foreign language that you're learning that you hear, the easier it is for you to hear when you're making a mistake because you know how it's supposed to sound. However, doing more passive listening when you're watching something with subtitles is also useful. For me personally, I've seen that I've been able to learn a lot of vocabulary this way. It also helps me understand context of situations better, and simply it's a good way to have fun and enjoy the language you're learning. Maybe you're feeling a little discouraged, but you watch a movie, even if it has subtitles in it, you're still being exposed to the language and yet having fun at the same time. You could do one without the other, but to me, when you combine them together, you get really good results, and it keeps things interesting in your study and they don't get too boring. The fourth thing, this may surprise some of you, is actually texting. Now, I did talk about how I personally prefer hello talk over everything else in the resources video, yet again. I can make a more in-depth video about why I personally choose to use HelloTalk. If you guys are curious, leave me a comment below. But texting in your target language is super duper useful in some ways you may not have thought of before. Texting in your target language helps your reading comprehension a ton because you're having to try to read and understand and dissect what the person is saying to you. It makes you learn more phrases. You're gonna learn more common everyday words because odds are if it's coming up in a casual texting conversation, it's a really common word in the language, right? So you can learn a lot of practical vocabulary that way. You can also learn how to ask for help and how to ask questions. I didn't know how to say like what does it mean in Korean until I really started texting other Koreans and I needed to ask that question a lot. Texting can also help you apply vocabulary and grammar that you've recently learned in your own study, and it can make you try to use it. When I personally learn new grammar or vocab, I try to use it in a conversation and try to feel out what the right way is to use it. And when you're using an app like HelloTalk, then the Korean can actually correct your mistakes while you're texting them, which I think is a really helpful feature, because if you're just talking on Kakao or something, it's a little difficult to correct somebody, whereas some of these language learning apps make it really easy to do so. And even though this is really secondary, it can also help you a lot with your typing skills in Korean or whatever language you're learning, especially if you're working off of the computer. Number 5 is cultural exposure. Now, if you're going to learn a language, it's really important to have at least a little bit of knowledge about the cultural background of the country, because it can actually help you understand why some things in the language are the way they are, if that makes sense. You can really get cultural exposure just by talking to people from that country or doing your own research on that country's history and the culture. But a good example of when cultural exposure helped me in Korean was when learning the different levels of formality. There's about 4 different ways you can talk in Korean depending on the age or the social status of the person that you're speaking to. And this can be a really confusing concept for native English speakers because we don't really have anything that equates to it. But when you understand more about the Korean social hierarchy, to me it becomes a little easier to understand when to use which formality level and why they just exist in general. Number 6 is language learning friends. And I don't mean language learning partners, I mean language learning friends. Basically just friends or general acquaintances that are either learning the same language as you or are just as passionate about language study as you are. The reason this is a good idea is because you guys can motivate each other when maybe you're feeling a little discouraged, and if you're studying the same language, you can offer tips or advice or maybe even help with a certain kind of concept in that language. If you're looking for somebody to make friends with that's learning the same language as you, check out the comment section below, you guys. Leave some stuff about yourself, what language you're learning, and maybe you guys can make some friends. Number 7, mixture of study materials. This is really important because not everybody learns the same way, right? Some people are more auditory learners, some more visual, etc. So it's really important, especially if you're a beginner in language learning, to try out lots of different methods until you find the one that you feel is the most effective. It took me about 6 months to really figure out what the best way for me to learn was, and it might take you more time than that or less time than that. But the best way to do it, like I said, is just try out a bunch of things and gauge how much you are retaining from those different methods. An example of this would be like trying out memorized versus physical flashcards. Number 8, explore other people's language learning journeys. This is a good way to find other methods of study, like I mentioned in the previous tip. You can see what other people have done and try them out for yourself because they may work for you. That's the whole point of this video that I'm making right now. It can also motivate you when maybe you see people that are a little farther along, and can help you remember that if you work hard, you can get there too. Number 9, speaking and reading practice combined. Now, I talked in the resources video about how I like to use Iyagi PDFs, read them out loud, record myself as a way to practice my pronunciation, as well as posting audio files on HelloTalk for native speakers to correct for me. And while real natural conversation and such is important, if you've never tried the method of speaking and reading practice combined, I think you definitely should, which is exactly what it sounds like. You print out something in your target language, you read the entire thing out loud, record it, and listen back for your mistakes. Not only are you reading, but you're also speaking as you're reading. It's a good way to practice pronunciation, learn new vocabulary, and maybe new grammar concepts. This is especially useful to me for people who are either shy about their pronunciation and want to improve it a little bit more before they talk to to native speakers, or if you're just in a place where it's really hard for you to talk to native speakers, this way your pronunciation maybe doesn't have to suffer as much. You can still get practice in. It's better than doing nothing at all. And finally, number 10, this is probably the most important one of them all, don't pressure yourself too much. Language learning is a long process. Some may even argue it's a lifelong process, because even as native speakers and whatever your native language is, there are still words and maybe grammar that we still don't understand, even though we're fluent speakers. You have to approach foreign language with the same idea, you know, you're never gonna know every word in the language or understand everything about it. Sure, you'll reach a point of being comfortable in speaking and using it in your everyday life, but you never really stop learning. So because of this, and because it's such a long journey, it can be really easy to get discouraged or to feel like we aren't progressing as much as we'd really like to. But it's important to keep in mind that learning a language is not an easy thing to do, and if you're struggling, or it's stressful sometimes, or if there's something you just can't seem to understand, that's completely okay. You should pat yourself on the back for wanting to study a foreign language anyway, especially if this is something you're aspiring to do on your own. That's a really cool thing. The most important thing to do is just take your language learning one day at a time, one step at a time. Don't think too much about the future and all of the things you don't know, because it's only going to overwhelm you, and honestly it won't do any good either. Hopefully at least one of these tips were helpful for you. If you apply any of these into your life, or if you have your own language tips you would like to share with everyone, please feel free to leave it in the comments below. And like I said, you guys, interact with each other, make friends. I have a really nice subscriber base. All of you are really nice to each other, so don't be shy. If you have any video requests for either Mondays with Mattie, Language Wednesday, or Fandom Friday, feel free to leave them in any comment section on any of my videos. Send them to me via Twitter or Instagram, Tumblr, Wattpad, whatever. I'll definitely look at it and consider your idea. Anyway, I love you guys a long time, and I will see you on the flip flop later.